This is my 2007 Toyota Yaris, and the door lock doesn't do squat when I press the unlock button on my key fob, so I'm going to show you how to fix it. We start by removing the armrest trim on the door, including the door lock and window switches. I like to start at the top and give it a little pull, then you work your way down until all the pieces have been removed. Now you need to pull the connector off the back of the door lock and window switch assembly. It won't fit through the hole when it comes time to pull the door panel off. Just push in the tabs on both sides and pull the connector out. Next, remove the 3 screws holding the door panel onto the door. Magnetic tip screwdrivers are a lifesaver here. Next, use a Phillips head screwdriver to remove the screw behind the door handle. Then use a flathead screwdriver to pop it out. Once it's out, you need to unsnap the white and green plastic pieces from the door handle. Once those are out, turning the door handle 90 degrees should allow the ball catches to pop out, freeing the door handle. Before removing the door panel, we have to pop out this little snap pin. Just pull firmly at the forward top of the door and it should pop out. Unsnap the rest of the door by sticking your fingers under the panel and sliding them in a clockwise direction all the way around the door panel until you reach the window again. Now we can remove the door panel. Just pull the bottom toward you slightly and lift. Here's where we get to see how cheap this car is made. This plastic barrier needs to come off in order for us to access the door's internals. It's held on with a gooey sealant, and the only way to get it out of the way is to peel it back by hand. You're going to tear the plastic at some point, so don't feel bad. A little tape will fix it later. Now grab a 10mm socket and remove the bolt holding the window track in place. This needs to be loosened to get the door lock actuator out. Here's a shot of the window track so you can get a reference of what we're loosening. Now take a flathead screwdriver and pop out the electrical connector on the door lock actuator. Next you'll need a Torx bit to remove the 3 bolts holding the actuator to the door. Once they're out, move the window track out of the way and wiggle the actuator loose. There is a door handle arm and a door lock switch holding it in. Keep the top of the actuator tilted towards the inside of the door and pull down slightly. It should pop right out. Once the actuator is out, take a small flathead screwdriver and pop the linkage cover open. Pop out the plastic pieces and remove the linkages. One has an S-bend that you have to tilt up to get it out. The other one looks like the hole of a needle. This one needs to be rotated 90 degrees and lifted out. Okay, so here's where things get complicated. If you know what's good for you, you'll just go spend the $300 for a new actuator and replace it outright. Otherwise, you can be stupid like me and go all the way to the root of what's causing this problem. It's cheaper, but getting this thing back together is pretty rough. So here's where everything went south on me. When I opened the actuator, all the parts fell out. You can almost read the disappointment in my hands as I realized that this just turned into a complicated mess. So this is the culprit. This little $10 electric motor. To get this out of the actuator, just lift the connectors out with a flathead screwdriver. The motor should pop right out. Once it's out, pop the plastic enclosure off with the same screwdriver and slide out the rotor. If you look closely at the back end of the rotor where the brushes contact the shaft, there's a black residue on it. This is why the actuator won't work. This residue is blocking the electrical connection that makes the motor turn. To clean this, I just used a brass wire brush and carefully scrubbed the residue off. Be careful not to break the copper wires running to the windings. To put the motor back together, pull these two tabs back with a pair of needle nose pliers. Then we can slide the rotor back into the housing, install the plastic backing, and use a flathead screwdriver to bend the tabs back down. Install the motor back into the actuator and assemble the actuator. Now we test. The first test involves plugging everything back in and testing the lock actuator by pressing the door lock buttons in the car. This will test that the actuator is working properly. You should hear the motor turning when pressing the buttons. The second test verifies that it's assembled properly. Slide the linkage tabs to lock or unlock the actuator, and shove the screwdriver into the striker slot and try to pull it out. If locked, it shouldn't move when you try to pull the green lever back. When unlocked, the green lever should release the screwdriver. Do not test this with the striker on the car. If it doesn't work right, you won't be able to get it off. Now go ahead and install the linkages back into their original slots. They're different tabs, so you can't mix them up. Push the window track out of the way and put the actuator back into the door and use one of the original torque screws to loosely hold it into place. There are two linkages that need to be installed on the door before we tighten down the actuator screws. The first is the door handle lever that must fit into the green cup on the actuator. The second is the lock mechanism. It looks like a rod with gear teeth on the end of it. It has to be inserted into the cup on the back of the actuator. This allows you to still unlock the door with the key. Take a guess on how I figured that out. Once these two linkages are hooked up, we can insert and tighten the three torque screws. Then we can insert and tighten the screw that holds the window track in place. Once that's done, snap the linkage wires into the plastic holder above the gap. Make sure the white tipped linkage reaches further than the green one. Now, re-stick the plastic cover. Then, insert the wire harness plug into the actuator. Now we can reinstall the door panel. Just pull the door lock switch harness through the hole and drop the top of the window trim into the slot next to the window. Tap around the outside edge of the panel to snap it into place. Install the snap pin at the front of the door and then reinstall the three screws near the door grab handle. Now we have to reinstall the door handle and lock. The white linkage is for the lock switch on top, and the green one is for the door handle. Insert the ball catch into the slot at a perpendicular angle to the handle assembly, and then rotate the linkage toward the back. Then snap the linkages into their slots. Push the door handle into the hole, and install the screw into the door handle. Now we can reinstall the door trim. Install the top piece first, then install the electrical connector into the door lock switches and reinstall that piece. Then reinstall the large trim piece.